Hello everyone, welcome to Fishin, the podcast where we discuss Modern's most competitive tribe and help the whole community become better Merfolk players. I'm Kody, one of the co-hosts of this show, and not Cody Smith on Twitter. We also have, as always, a new and improved Matthew Cottle. How you doing, Matt?
I'm doing great. I like how we've been friends for, 6 years now plus, and you still can't pronounce my last name correctly.
Cadillo.
But that's Cadillo.
Yeah, we've been over this before, but I just always, for some reason, it always, like, if I don't prep myself, it just comes out as Cadillo.
No,
Cottle.
but it's for everyone out there in cyberspace, it is Memorial Day. It is a holiday. I did not work today. I don't believe Kody did either.
I did, actually.
So, get a job, you hippie that has Memorial Day off. A postman.
I worked my second job, so we don't need to discuss that right now. But where can we find you on the intrawebs?
On the intrawebs, I am at Matthew Caudill 8. So hit me up. I love talking Magic with our fans, and anybody just enjoys our content. Speaking of which, we had a great conversation, Kody and I, with one of our probably top followers at Mr. Kai Guy. He is a great person. We talked to him probably for a good hour or two throughout the evening, just talking about Modern, Legacy, what should be banned, and the answer should be nothing in Modern. And it ultimately, the way the conversation started was he wanted to contribute to the show, and he did not have a Patreon, so he asked if he could just make a one-time donation to help me out with getting the mic, because as I said last time, I would match dollar for dollar. And we said absolutely, and he went ahead and just off the top paid for half. So Mr. Kai Guy,
yes,
thank you,
excellent, thank you so much.
I immediately went on Amazon, had it overnighted, and it is here. I'm using it, and hopefully you all are really enjoying the silky, chocolatey smoothness that is my voice.
It is definitely clear. It is definitely clear. It kind of sounded like you were using one of those the cans, like the empty soup cans with the string, a la Little Rascals, but it's definitely much improved, and we hope that if you talk to Mr. Kai Guy on Twitter, he's a really great guy, like we said. Give him a thumbs up. He's a really cool guy, and it very generously helps with our podcast and helping make our content much better.
And a very intelligent Magic player. So you don't have to donate a ton of money to talk to us. Kody and I are pretty addicted to our cell phones. We always have them on us. So please communicate. Ask us questions. If anything, we just like talking Modern. We like talking Legacy. We like talking Commander. We like talking just Magic in general. So reach out.
I'm looking at you, Swolefish. Swolefish and I have a lot of Merfolk content discussions. But you can always, and there's ways that you don't have to pay any money that you can support the show. And that is by, following us on social media and retweeting, things for us, reviewing us on whatever podcast app you use, or on YouTube, subscribing to us on YouTube. We also release our episodes there. So there's lots of ways that you can support us without shelling out a dime.
Yeah. The biggest one, tell a friend. Just help us get our name out there. But one thing I will say, which I thought was kind of funny with the conversation we had with Mr. Kai Guy, is he mentioned that we were actually at about 20 episodes, which I found hilarious because I didn't even keep track, because I am an awesome co-host and I don't know how many shows we've actually made.
Yeah, this is episode 21.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
So when we first started this way back when, and Kody, I think I've told the story before, Kody said, I'm starting a Merfolk podcast. And I'm like, that's an awful idea. We're going to have like two things to talk about. And Cody's like, you need to get a microphone. I'm like, you can go pound sand. I'm not paying anything because we're not going to be doing this past like 3 episodes.
Yeah. And
so lo and behold, we actually have people who listen. and we're 20 episodes deep and growing as a small channel. So you know what? It's time to stop being a amateur and be a somewhat amateur.
Yeah, be a pseudo professional.
A pseudo professional. I like that.
And we're definitely gonna have Mr. Kai Guy on the show at some point because he's pretty on point as far as the kind of folk that we would like to have surrounding us in the show. We also gave him the opportunity to pick the random Merfolk, which is actually a pretty unique one. I think he picked number 42. And Matt, do you want to go ahead and read this guy for us, or this lady folk?
I do. So I was going to make up some elaborate lie of why Mr. Kai Guy picked number 42, but I don't want to waste time because I actually want to talk about this card a little bit. It's a random Merfolk that I'd actually never seen before, so I'm looking at it for the first time. It's called Enclave Cryptologist. It's 1 blue for a creature wizard Merfolk that is a 0/1. It is from Rise of the Eldrazi, and it has the level up ability. I'm not going to go into super details about that. We've talked about level up a billion times. So level 1 and 2, it's just a 0/1. Tap it, draw a card, and discard a card. So you can loot. But if you get to level 3, it's still a 0/1, but you can tap it and draw a card. The art is absolutely stunning. This is during the Rise of Eldrazi time, so the art was okay. This is right when Wizards started kind of getting to the art that I'm not a big fan of. The very computerized. I'm trying to be diplomatic saying this.
Just like digitally done, not painted.
Correct. It doesn't look like art. It looks like a video game screenshot. But this looks like a beautiful piece of art. This is a Merfolk with feet, not fins, and I'm okay with it. It looks great.
Yeah, it has like a whole bunch of like charts and maps in the background, and she's holding like what looks like either or maybe throwing like a little cube or something like that.
I thought she was floating a rose. So you know what? That's what makes this great. Is that like there's a million interpretations of it. It is beautiful. So, shoot, I don't have the artist in front of me. Whoever did it, great job.
Igor Claryluk, Kleyryluk. I'm not even gonna.
Yeah, whatever. I don't speak Eastern European. Not here in Texas. We don't talk to them Eastern Europeans.
So Enclave Cryptologist, I believe, has really good value in Commander. I'm sure there's some sort of very janky modern brew, but this is definitely not seeing play in our tier 1 Merfolk list, is it?
No, and that's part of the reason why I've never seen this card before. I was actually taking a break from Magic during the original Zendikar. It's one of the few breaks I've taken since Magic became a thing. But yeah, it's definitely not good enough. And honestly, I mean, we're talking Commander here, but even Commander, it's probably pretty fringe. You're playing this because it's just absolutely gorgeous card, and realistically, it's just not a huge target. So the ability to draw an extra card every turn for just yourself and potentially abuse it by being able to untap it, no one's really going to blow that up. There's going to be other things they're going to use their swords or their terminates or things like that on. So it might survive a lot longer than normal.
It might actually be okay in like a control list where you can like pitch flashback cards. So you can draw cards and then pitch a flashback card so you can snap it back. And I don't know, maybe there's something there, but I wouldn't say super competitive. So going into the main topic, we are going to be discussing Chalice of the Void in both Legacy and Modern Merfolk.
Yes, we have decided we're going to devote an entire episode to one artifact.
Well, and this is also kind of a testing bed for what we can do as a podcast. Obviously, we are fairly limited in scope, but we do want to discuss kind of high-level strategy. And kind of going into that is discussing cards that are in some ways, like in Legacy, I'm sure that you'll agree with me, as a staple, but in Modern is definitely something that it has had its share of controversy. Let's just say.
So 60,000 foot view, Chalice of the Void is actually one of the most powerful cards ever printed, especially not considering being one of the original broken cards. It is actually restricted in Vintage, because when Chalice was not restricted in Vintage, it was a 4 of all day. Because Chalice on 0, you don't get to play your Lotus, you don't get to play your Moxes, but I get to play all mine, is really, really, really good.
So before we go on to the discussion, I'm going to read Chalice of the Void for those of our listeners that don't quite know what the card is. It is pretty iconic, but there might be somebody out there, so we just want to go ahead and hit it. Chalice of the Void.
This is for you, John. I know you don't know this card.
Chalice of the Void has a converted mana cost of 0, but its cost is X. Chalice of the Void enters the battlefield with X charge counters on it. Whenever a player casts a spell with the converted mana cost equal to the number of charge counters on Chalice of the Void, counter that spell. So that's why it's busted, because you pay 2 mana to put it on 1, or you pay 4 mana to put it on 2, and basically anything that's cast of that cost is immediately countered.
So way back in the day, well before Fishin was a thing, I always joked around that if I had a Magic podcast, it'd be called Chalice on 1. Because Chalice on 1 on turn 1 is one of the most powerful plays in Magic, hands down. Especially in Legacy, when it's very easy to do so. You have your Simian Spirit Guides, you have your Elvish Spirit Guides, you have your Soul Lands, the City of Traders, and the Ancient Tombs. So when you get Chalice on 1, you shut down Ponder, you shut down Brainstorm, you shut down Swords to Plowshares, you shut down Delver, you shut down Deathrite Shaman. You shut down just a Lightning Bolt, a ton of very, very relevant decks can barely function if Chalice is on 1. So it is just a incredibly powerful card. And when it comes to Merfolk, there are certain decks that Merfolk needs Chalice just to be able to win it all. One that comes to mind is Storm in Legacy, because you play Chalice on 0. If you play Chalice on 0 before the Legacy player or before the Storm player has a chance of going off, you can hit their Lotus Petals, you hit their Lion's Eye Diamonds, and they're not going to be able to storm off on you and win.
Now, I want to clarify something, because I'm sure somebody doesn't know how this works. So when you look at the card, it says that whenever a player casts a spell with converted mana cost equal to the number of charge counters on Chalice of the Void, counter that spell. So what you're telling me, Matt, is that you can play a Chalice for 0 mana, and it'll have 0 charge counters on it. And so anything that costs 0 will get countered.
Absolutely.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that was perfectly clear for all of our listeners.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to when I was talking about in Vintage. So the reason why I was so busted in Vintage was the person who went first would draw all their cards, including their Moxen and their Black Lotus, whatever. They would play out all their Mox and Black Lotuses, or whatever 0 converted mana cost cards they have. Then they play their 1 of 4 Chalices on 0, which when they would pass the turn would not allow their opponent to play any of their Moxen, which essentially means they would be behind like 3 or 4 turns. And that's why they went ahead and made it a
restricted.
Restricted, thank you.
Yep.
But again, since we don't have Moxen in Legacy, we don't have that issue. And it's really more of an equalizer. So there's, again, as I said, there's just so many decks that can't win with a Chalice on 1 or a Chalice on 0. So even though Fish doesn't have the fast mana that allows it to play a Chalice on 1 on turn 1, it still is 100% needed as a 4 of.
Yeah, and I've done my playing of Legacy with Legacy Fish, and I will testify to that even a Chalice on turn 2, putting Chalice with 1 counter is often enough to just put your opponent behind a turn. And really that's kind of the point in Legacy, because It's less so in Legacy than it is in Modern, but Merfolk is a clunky deck. It's not fat. It's not a fast aggro deck. And the thing is most people kind of, from the outside looking in, looking at Legacy, kind of tend to view it as this format where all this busted stuff is happening. And you're not wrong by thinking that, but it's one of those things that there are decks that do busted things. And Merfolk does have access to some unfair cards like Force of Will, but you need to slow down the decks that are chocked full of broken things. So basically slowing them down to your speed so you can kill them. That's kind of how it works.
Absolutely. And again, another misconception is Legacy is such a fast format, when in the reality of it is a lot of decks are control-y, grindy matches that are going to take a while. So if you're playing a deck like Miracles or Grixis Delver or Four Color Control or anything like that,
Nick Fit, Check Pile. There's lots of decks that take a long time to do what they need.
But what they do need is they need their ponders and their brainstorms to essentially set up their draws to make sure they're getting the cards they want. And that's, I mean, ponder, brainstorm, crack, fetch, shuffle is a very, very normal thing to do in Legacy. And if you're turning them off of their ponders and their brainstorms, then they're going to be in heaps of trouble. You turning off Cabal Therapy, you're turning off, I mean, Swords to Plowshare is like one of the key ways of removal, which is one of the things that hurts Legacy Merfolk the most. And you're turning that off. So again, if you're playing Legacy Merfolk, it's a 4 of. It's going to be one of the most expensive things you have to buy, but you just have to do it.
Yeah, and I would hop on that as soon as possible because they are going back up. They did see the reprint, so if you haven't gotten yours, please do yourself the favor. If you are financially able to, I would say get them, but they're going to go back up.
Yeah, they peaked at about 90 to between 90 and 100 there for a while. After the Masters 25 reprint, they're at about 58-ish right now. I'm sure you can probably get them for a little bit less on the open market, but they're not getting cheaper than that. So if you need them, get them.
Yeah. And like we said, it is a 4 of in Legacy. So if you are going to be playing Legacy Merfolk for a traditional build, you definitely want those there, and they're kind of necessary for the format. The format is chock full of 1-drops, and Chalice on 1 can definitely, if not shut down a combo deck or something like that, or I mean even decks like Elves. If you have a Chalice on 1, you've put them behind by a excellent margin. And it's one of those things that, it's a format staple. It's not going to go anywhere. I don't think we have any disagreements on where Chalice is in Legacy for Merfolk.
Correct. That's why let's move on, because I want to disagree with you.
So
let's talk about the real hot topic here, because this is something that a lot of other streamers and podcasts brought up. We're taking a little bit different look at it, but is Chalice of the Void a viable card in Modern, Fish?
Yes. So in doing research for this, Merfolk Joe, who is a YouTube content creator, has run through a few. He has a few videos on it and sideboarding guides, and it generally seems that people are kind of split. So let's back up here for a second, because one of the main reasons this has come up as kind of a recent discussion in the Merfolk subreddit, as well as the Discord a little bit, is M. Hayashi, who is a Merfolk player that doesn't really interact with the online community very much. So he kind of does his own thing. He's done at least one 5.0 with a version of Merfolk that we'll have the link to it in the show notes, but a version of Modern Merfolk where he 5.0'd with a Chalice of the Void Merfolk deck.
In the main board, correct?
Yes, 4 of in the main. And we're gonna post the list because it is interesting, and it kind of, it forces one, when you see something like that, to kind of go, well, 1.5.0, that could just be a flash in the pan. That could, if you hit any random number of decks correctly, you can just knock out 5 wins in a row. That's not something, but the thing is that he's had multiple 5-0 finishes with this deck. And, at that point, that's when you kind of got to sit up and kind of go, well, when we watch coverage, at SCG events or GPs or even the Pro Tour, we had a Modern Pro Tour this year, what kind of decks are we seeing? And we're seeing a lot of decks that, not unlike Legacy, use a lot of 1-drops. So it could be tempting to want to splash that Chalice in.
No, absolutely. Just a few notable 1-drops in Modern for you. You have your Path to Exile. You have your Serum Visions. You have Noble Hierarch. You have Aether Vial. You have Goblin Guide, Lightning Bolt,
Fatal Push.
I mean, there's a ton. So
basically, the whole Bogles deck.
The entire Bogles deck. You can prevent Bogles from putting on pants.
Yeah, no, not the whole deck, but most of the deck. It's one of those things that, Modern is a very powerful format, and it's very dependent on being able to play the best cards if you're going to be, playing competitively. And so a lot of those powerful spells, lightning bolts, you listed off a whole list of them for 1 mana. That seems like a really good way to kind of attack a lot of decks. Even some recent decks, kind of like Hollow One, Death Shadow, that are kind of decks that have recently, cropped up. It can be kind of tempting. And one thing I do want to add for that, for those 1-drops, a lot of decks run Snapcaster Mage to get their 1-drop spells back.
You are casting from the graveyard. So if Snapcaster tries hitting a lightning bolt that's in the graveyard and you have your Chalice on 1, it will be countered. Now, one thing I do want to point out that we haven't hit yet is that when it comes to paper Magic, as the player of the Chalice, it is your responsibility to remember that the spell is countered. So a lot of times, good Magic players will actually throw like lightning bolts at you when you have a counter, when Chalice on 1, to see if you remember to activate the counter that is on your Chalice. So yes. be aware of that.
Yes, I do have a few Legacy players that will try to sneak one out from you if you're to see if you're paying attention, basically, because if you say that it resolves, it resolved, then there, it's kind of like that's one reason why, at competitive levels, you don't, when with Merfolk, you could not say what all of your Merfolk are attacking for because they're lords and they don't pump with counters, so you don't technically have to tell them. It's one of those things that you can kind of get a competitive edge and just see if it happens, because if they agree that it happened, then it happened. And that's kind of how Magic rules work.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to take a look at this list because it is definitely interesting. It definitely eschews a lot of the things that make a Merfolk deck. And one of those things is creature density. So M. Hayashi's list, and as well as the list that Merfolk Joe ran through his Nikachu also did a similar video series where they basically ran this list. This list runs 24 creatures, which isn't a bad amount, but in a creature deck, that's a low number. In Merfolk, we're running generally 30 at least. Half the deck is creatures. That's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, but it makes a little bit more sense because you're turning off your more aggro-y, tempo-y to become a little more control-y. So you're going to need less creature density.
Yes, that is definitely correct. So we have a lot of standbys that are going to be in every Merfolk deck ever. So there's Master of the Pearl Trident and Lord of Atlantis. We're never not having a Merfolk deck without those guys. Silvergill Adept, newcomer Merfolk Trickster is definitely putting in work and in this deck is a 4 of. We also have Harbinger of the Tides, which is definitely it plays very well with Merfolk Trickster. But the other one that is kind of unique is Coral Helm Commander, and we actually discussed this last episode.
Which is really ironic. Well, not ironic, serendipitous. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah. And
I get to say serendipitous 2 weeks in a row. Come on, universe, let's make it 3.
Fishin, the thesaurus-based podcast.
Exactly.
But Coral Helm Commander is not a card that you would want to play in, regular Merfolk, but with Chalice, you can kind of buy extra time with forcing your opponent to have to work around your restrictions. So Coral Helm Commander can actually be a house in this deck.
And that's kind of what we said, is that he is a house and he is incredibly strong. The problem is he's just too slow. But if you have a Chalice on and you're completely shutting another person out of the game, then yeah, absolutely. Or not even shutting them out of the game in Modern, because you're not going to shut them out of the game, but really just slowing them down enough.
Slowing them down enough is kind of the issue. The other thing that Merfolk Joe commented on with Coral Helm Commander is that he's a flyer. So this helps with the humans matchup with what's that mantis rider? That's it. I was like,
correct.
It's the mantis, and there's a rider, but it helps with mantis rider, and I mean there's a few other decks like Vault Scourge and Affinity that it kind of helps with. It definitely isn't a dead card, but in this deck it does have its chance to shine really.
Well, and that's kind of one thing I was thinking about too, is 2 of the hardest matches that Fish is going to have is against Affinity and against Ad Nauseam. And you can just play this on 0 and completely shut the Affinity player and the Ad Nauseam player out.
Well, and that's something actually I do want to discuss, because if you're at a high level tournament, I actually have kind of conflicting views on if Chalice is good against Affinity, because if you're at a major tournament, you're not going to know what your opponent's playing. So you're not going to necessarily just want to drop a Chalice on 0, because even though Affinity does have a lot of 0 drops, you're not just going to, I mean, if it's at your local store and there's the guy who plays Affinity.
I'm talking more game 2, game 3, or in my opinion, Chalice should probably be a sideboard card.
Which actually gets to my next point that you are about, that you made, is that, you don't know that your opponent's playing Affinity turn 1, or game 1 rather. So let's say it doesn't matter if you win or lose. When they go to sideboard, they're going to get rid of a lot of things that get hit by a Chalice on 0, and they can't get rid of everything. Obviously, they're going to leave in their mana producers and all that, but they can work around it because they have the knowledge. And when they know that it's there, you can't use it to establish a dominating presence where you're controlling what they're playing as much. I mean, they obviously still have to work with their deck, but at the same time, I think it's something that you would side out game 2 against Affinity a lot of the time.
Potentially, if it was me, I wouldn't, because most Affinity players that I've played against, whether it be at GPs or FNMs, are going to be more stubborn. They're going to leave most of their 0 mana or 0 casting cost artifacts in. So, I mean, you still shut down quite a bit of the deck. And even if you don't hit their 0, as you said before, if you hit their 1s, or again, you're probably never going to get to 2 in Fish.
Yeah, well, especially against Affinity, you're not.
Yeah, or even late game, unless potentially late game, but still. So yeah, I mean, what I would do too is kind of, here's how I see it in my mind's eye. Mind's eye got a reprint, so I gotta throw it a little bone here.
That was an $11 card, isn't that crazy?
Yeah, because it's awesome in Commander.
Yeah,
I play Mind's Eye in everything, but anyway. So some modern decks have done this in the past. But I think this is where Fish could really shine by using Chalice of the Void. If you played in the sideboard, you have your tempo aggro deck beginning the game, or in game 1. And then in game 2, you bring in your Chalices, you can bring in some more counter magic, and you become a more control-y deck for game 2. So you completely change the kind of deck you're playing. which puts your opponent on their back foot, because for game 3, what do they board against? Are they boarding against a aggro tempo deck, or are they boarding against a control deck?
Or let's say you won game 1 with your regular Merfolk deck, and then you switch gears, and then
they think they're playing Merfolk, and all of a sudden they're playing a control deck. It's like, and they're not prepared for it. Absolutely.
Yeah. So we'll go back to the list here that kind of illustrates what you're talking about. So in this list, it is a more controlling spell package. So we have 1 Echoing Truth. I mean, which even if you have to just fire that off against one thing, that hits a lot of things in the format. I mean, basically it's only actively bad against Bogles, I think. And probably humans. You don't want to bounce things back to their you don't want to bounce the creatures back to the hands. That's kind of a bad thing for.
That's a no.
Yeah, it's definitely a no.
That's gonna be bad. Okay.
But it does run a playset of Dismember.
Yes.
Now this is pretty spicy. It needs it.
Just yes.
Yeah. No. It needs it. This is a deck that you're trying to slow down your opponents. You're trying to keep them slow so you can get your Coral Helm commanders up and all that fun stuff, and you need to build up and you need to stop your opponent from what they're doing. Going to the artifacts, which is another thing that I wanted to discuss about Chalice in the main deck in Merfolk, is that Merfolk always, and I mean always, runs Aether Vial, which is a 1-drop artifact. So
turn 1 Aether Vial, turn 2 Chalice. All your stuff gets through because you're not casting it with the vial.
So yes, but then
combo.
But you also have to be careful that if let's say and part of it is in the land base that we'll discuss. But let's say you're not able, or you cast a Chalice on turn 2 for 1, Chalice on 1, but then you draw Aether Vial. That's just a dead card in your hand. That might as well be a tip card. you're never.
Yeah, but if you're drawing, so realistically, I mean, that'd be really be bad luck, because you wouldn't have Aether Vial in your opening hand, and then it'd be turn 2. You're deciding if you want to play Aether Vial versus Chalice on 1, because that's what you drew.
Yes, so. and it's one of those things that Aether Vial was kind of already a bad draw late game anyway. So if it's turn 6 or turn 7 and you top deck an Aether Vial, you're not going to be happy with that ever. It doesn't matter if you have a Chalice on 1 or not. You just don't want an Aether Vial like past turn 3, I'd say.
You can always try playing it and see if your opponent remembers that Chalice is on 1.
And they're just like, yeah, it resolves, and then you just like, all right, put it into play. So it runs 4 Chalice of the Voids, as we already said. Then the 4 Spreading Seas, which are still key, because I mean we can have. I mean, this deck is basically a 12.
Spreading Seas is the best card in Merfolk, so you don't take it out.
And our decks, this deck at least has 12 lords basically in the deck with Coral Helm Commander. So you might say like, oh well, the creatures will be big enough. You still want Spreading Seas. You can cut off lands.
Coral Helm Commander is kind of like the Uncle Eddie of the Lords. He's not really invited to the Christmas vacation, but he kind of shows up, and he's part of the group, but he's really an outcast.
Yeah.
Has anybody ever told you before your bad luck?
Those were my mother's dying words. But, when you got your body covered in third-degree burns and your foot's caught in a bear trap, you're going to start talking crazy.
But so then we're going to go into the lands here. 10 basic islands, which is not uncommon for Merfolk. 4 Mutavaults. Still, we want Mutavaults. 1 Oboro, Palace in the Clouds. That's another non-basic, pretty bread and butter for Merfolk. But this one runs 4 Fairy Conclave.
Really?
Yes. And part of the reason for it is this is a heavier control deck. And having more mainlands are good ways to, be able to fill out your board and swing for 1 game-winning turn.
So the reason I think that's really odd is the key to the man lands is they come into play tapped. So if you draw one island, one man land, and you want to play Chalice on one, then you're screwed. Or on Chalice on turn 2, you have to wait till turn 3 to be able to untap. It just seems very risky.
Now, and this, you're right, but there's a couple things to consider. So one thing that that you have to consider is you're never going to be playing Chalice on turn 1. So
correct.
So and there's no other 1-drops except for Aether Vial is the only 1-drop. So basically the only time that you're ever put behind by playing Fairy Conclave in this deck is if you have an Aether Vial in hand.
Okay.
So that's the only time you're ever behind on turn 1 if you have a Fairy. In fact, you want a Fairy Conclave turn 1. That's the best time for it to come out, I guess. The other time, this is also kind of where I said, there's kind of a non-bow between Chalice of the Void and Aether Vial, is if you get an opening hand with an Aether Vial, a Chalice, 1 island, and a Fairy Conclave, then you're basically priced out of playing that Aether Vial.
You mean the Chalice?
Well, I don't know. I would generally prefer to get the Chalice down as early as possible.
I'm sorry. I see what you're saying now. Yeah.
So,
that makes sense.
Aether Vial is a great card, don't get me wrong, but if I was given the choice on turn 2 to play a Chalice on 1 or Aether Vial, I would pretty much take Chalice if I didn't know what my opponent was playing. I think that's the better play.
So I have a question about the mana base, since I don't have the deck up in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
Is it playing Cavern of Souls?
It is not.
Okay, so the reason I was thinking that it would be is that if you for some reason are using the Chalice and potentially countering your own creature spells, the Cavern of Souls would actually allow you to get right through it because your creature spells cannot be countered.
Yeah, that's definitely something that my first Legacy deck was Soldiers, and that was definitely a tactic because it was not uncommon to be at 4 mana on turn 2, and you could play Chalice on 1 turn 1, and then Chalice on 2 turn 2, and then be able to push your Soldiers through the Chalice trigger due to the Cavern of Souls. But the thing is here is you're probably not going to get your Chalice on 2.
Yeah, that's true. And other than that, it's probably not going to be doing much. Again, you would think that would just kind of make the deck push it a little bit towards the better. And I'm not saying play a play set because Blood Moon's a thing still, but maybe 1 or 2 just in case.
Yeah, it's definitely worth considering. And Merfolk Joe went down to 3 Fairy Conclaves, so that's something that you could also swap out a Fairy Conclave and another island for so you have 2 caverns. Because that is it's a corner case, but it's something that could come up, and you can just push your fish right through, and that also kind of helps solve the problem where if you don't have your Aether Vial, you're not getting them for free past the Chalice.
Yep.
So you could have, if you play Aether Vial turn 1, Chalice on 2 turn 2, and then later get Chalice on 2 later, then you're not stuck.
I agree.
And then for the sideboard, we have 4 Tech Edges, which is pretty good. I mean, we have a lot of greedy decks running around in Modern right now, and obviously your namesake Tron is definitely no stranger to Tech Edge, and it has 4 Relic of Progenitus, which has just been proving itself to be a very good card in the meta right now. 4 Deprive, which is kind of the kind of new hotness for sideboard for Merfolk, and 3 Echoing Truth as well in the sideboard there. Because Echoing Truth is a pretty baller card, and we definitely don't mind having it there. So I know that you haven't really had a lot of experience with this deck. What do you think about it, just from your first look?
I think it sounds fun. Anything I get to play Chalice of the Void in, I'm all about. So yeah, I would. I'm skeptical that it can have a sustained success over the top of the traditional Merfolk list. Mm-hmm. I hope it does. I hope it has fins, but I think if this started replacing the traditional Merfolk deck, I think it would get figured out pretty quickly.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that I think, and Nikachu kind of concluded his video with I think what we're coming to as our conclusion is it's really something that you have to feel out the meta. You know, if you're doing a lot of research and you see a lot of people on Magic, I mean, obviously if you're a serious like Pro Tour player, GP player, or SCG Open kind of person, you're paying attention to competitive leagues on Modern or on Magic Online rather. So what you want to do is you want to be looking for decks that are running, that are putting up really good, consistent results that run a lot of 1-drops. So decks like Bogles, Death Shadow, Burn, Affinity, like we said, we discussed that there's it's definitely good against Affinity. May not be like the silver arrow that we want it to be, or the death blow.
Playing Chalice on 0 against an Affinity player on turn 1 before they've been able to draw a card is so juicy. It's the juiciest burger you'll ever bite into.
Yeah, but see, I think like I said clearly before, you wouldn't, if you were going to a GP, unless you got paired with the other person you came with to the GP and you knew they were running Affinity, there'd be...
I'm talking game 2.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Affinity players, he's like vomiting all over the board.
Yeah.
It just artifact or edit, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
But
fishy artifacts.
But you do that and then they just look at you and they look at their hand and they just like they drop a land's like Springleaf Drum. Go. It's like, yes. Have those moxes just sit in your hand.
Yeah. And another one that's could be definitely seen as a deck is Storm. I think Chalice has legs against, just like it does in Legacy.
Absolutely. And the nice thing about Modern Storm is it's not nearly as fast as Legacy Storm. I mean, Legacy Storm can go off on turn 1 or turn 2 very consistently, but Modern Storm cannot. It's a turn 3, turn 4, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
So you'll have time to get it on 1, and they can't get through a Chalice on 1 either.
Yeah, definitely. So that was a pretty good episode. How do you feel, Matt?
I feel good. I think realistically, as I said before, that if the meta starts shifting that way, then other players are going to kind of figure it out. I think my conclusion of this is, 1, that it's not a main board card, it's a sideboard card. And 2, it's one of those things. When it comes to tiered decks like Merfolk, like Tron, like Humans, Affinity, where the slots are pretty slim as to make it different than the stock list, when somebody comes in with something completely random and people think they're playing just against basic fish deck and they have to completely retrain their brain to play against said deck, it can really throw people off and it can put up some results. The problem is that once people start seeing it often, they figure it out and they're like, okay, is this counterfish or is this traditional fish? And then it's like, oh, it's counterfish. I need to do this now. So again, if it's rare and it's a surprise and people are unprepared for it, I can see it still doing really well. If it becomes more of a normal thing, it might have a really good chance of getting figured out. I hope not. I think Chalice is just a great card. I want to see it played more often in Modern.
I could definitely see it being a deck like Chalice, Cheerios in Modern, where it's one of those decks that it's not a consistent deck that you see all the time, but then just every once in a while it just spikes a competitive league and just, wrecks people because they're, they haven't seen it in 6 months and they're not ready for it.
Yeah, actually, I think that example actually proves my point. Cheerios, when it came out after that Kaladesh card was printed, the dwarf artificer, whatever his name is. I mean, it came out and no one was prepared for it, and it started putting up huge results, and everybody was buying into Cheerios, and it was just the greatest deck ever. I did it. Yeah, I know you did. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, so this is what this deck does, and then It was very, very easy to figure out. Another one was Seismic Swans. I think it was last summer, or the summer before.
Yeah.
It won a GP in Utah, I believe, with like not very many people there, but everybody was like, "Oh my God, Seismic Swans is the next big thing." And it's like, no, this deck is funny. It's good, but it's not great by any means.
And it triggered a Simpsons-esque panic on the stockroom floor, and everybody sold all their stocks in Swans of Bernargles, and
you got greedy, Martin.
And everyone was buying foils, like liquidate non-foils, buy all the acquire legacy foils, and
we need more swans.
Yeah.
All the swans.
I bet you could get like a foil Swans of Bernargle for like a nickel.
I doubt it. I highly doubt it. I'm sure those things are actually, the foils usually keep their prices fairly high after
after a weird spike like that.
Yeah. Actually, no. The foils are $350 for the modern Masters.
Okay,
version.
so basically a nickel in MTG finance terms.
Yeah, exactly.
So remember, you can reach out and talk to us on Twitter, which is kind of where we interact with people the most. Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, we're at FishcastMTG. I personally am not Kody Smith on Twitter. And Matt, where can we find you on Twitter?
I'm Matthew Caudill 8. Again, I want to say thanks to Mr. Kai Guy. This new equipment is fantastic. I hope it sounds as good when on the finished product as it does right now through my headphones. And everyone out there, we really, really appreciate all your generosity. We are on Patreon, and I know there's a lot more things we want to do. Now that we have this piece of equipment, I know we want to get some more art, I believe. There's some music updates that Kody wants to do. We want to do some more streaming. I know we eventually, down the road, want to start getting to YouTube so you can see our gorgeous faces as we discuss this stuff. Again, that's probably much further down the road. But we have some plans that we want to do. And it's not we're not talking thousands of dollars we need to do this, but just a little bit of financial assistance would go a long way.
Yeah, the artist actually that we have concept art for different logos and whatnot, and a video layover is at Ishton on Twitter, who's a great guy. He actually plays Merfolk, both in standard and modern. He actually did the Channel Fireball team playmats. He's a big time guy. Like he's done lots of really good work in the community, and all of your support at patreon.com/fishcastmtg does go towards the channel and putting things back. And obviously I posted a picture of all the Merfolk tricksters
and my grill.
Yeah, and Matt's grill. We're looking for ways we can give back to you and make all of this look and sound better to you. So you can support us there at patreon.com/fishcastmtg. You can also support us for free by rating and subscribing whatever podcast app you use, or finding us on YouTube, subscribing there, commenting, talking to us, dingling that little bell, like a failed Navy SEAL, ringing the bell. And
really, on all days, you call out the Navy SEALs.
I was in the Navy. I can make those jokes. It's fine. Everything's fine.
You can't make those jokes. Only
I can make those jokes. Those are my people. If you have a longer form question, feel free to email us at fishcastmtg or fishcastmtg@gmail.com. Or if you have anything else you want to discuss, you can talk to us there. Our cover art was made by Tessa and Hunter Pruitt. Thank you very much for your work there.
And we're not trying to replace you, even though we're looking to get more art. We love our symbol right now.
Yes. And if you would like what we're doing here, again, rate, subscribe in the Apple, Google Play Store. We're up to 9 ratings and 4 reviews. So thank you very much. Keep up the good work. And
thanks, Mom.
Yeah. Thank you, Miss Caudill. And we will see you all next week. Thank you very much for your time.
Have a happy Memorial Day, everyone.
They're going to listen to this on Thursday, right?
Yeah, we should probably.
No, I'm leaving that in.
it needs to end up being, you need to splice back in there. You know they're going to listen to this on Thursday, right?
Okay, we're done here, I think.
Yeah.